"Sir, can you give me $1?" FBI Director Kash Patel stopped dead. Security tensed. Cameras rolled. What he did next defied every protocol, shocked his own agents, and would change both their lives forever. But it wasn't the dollar that mattered. It was what Patel gave him instead that left everyone speechless. The business card contained something no homeless person had ever received from an FBI director. Something so unprecedented it would spark national controversy, congressional hearings, and accusations that Patel violated federal protocol. By the end, one desperate request would become the most revolutionary law enforcement program in American history. But to understand the full impact of this encounter, we need to go back 3 months earlier, when Kash Patel first took the oath as FBI director. Standing in the agency's headquarters, surrounded by portraits of previous directors, Patel had made a promise that went beyond the traditional ceremonial words. He vowed to remember that law enforcement's highest calling was protecting the most vulnerable in society, regardless of their status or circumstances. Patel's journey to this moment had been anything but conventional. Born to Indian immigrant parents who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, he understood what it meant to struggle. His father drove a taxi in New York while studying for his engineering degree. His mother cleaned offices at night while raising 3 children. These experiences shaped Patel's worldview in ways that would prove crucial during his tenure as FBI director. The man on the courthouse steps was named Robert "Bobby" Washington, though most people just walked past without asking. At 67 years old, Bobby had been living on the streets of Washington, D.C. for nearly 4 years. He'd served 2 tours in Vietnam, worked construction for 3 decades, and raised 2 children as a single father after his wife died of cancer. But a series of medical bills and job losses had stripped away everything he'd built. Bobby wasn't looking for handouts or sympathy. He'd been a proud man his entire life, the kind who fixed his neighbors' cars for free and always paid his debts. But life had a way of humbling even the strongest people. Each morning, he'd sit on those courthouse steps not because he enjoyed begging, but because he'd learned that government buildings attracted people who might understand the weight of civic responsibility. On this particular morning, Bobby had been sitting there since dawn, watching the steady stream of suited officials march past with their briefcases and serious expressions. Most avoided eye contact. Some dropped loose change without slowing down. A few looked genuinely sorry, but kept walking anyway. Bobby didn't blame them. Everyone had their own burdens to carry in a city where power and pressure never slept. What Bobby didn't know was that FBI Director Patel had been watching him from inside the courthouse for the past 20 minutes. Between meetings with federal prosecutors and intelligence briefings, Patel had noticed the older man through the window. Something about Bobby's posture, dignified despite his circumstances, caught Patel's attention. There was a quiet strength there that reminded him of his own grandfather, who'd faced his own struggles with grace. The classified briefing that morning had been particularly heavy. Patel had received updates on domestic terrorism threats, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, and ongoing investigations into public corruption. The weight of protecting 330 million Americans was never far from his mind. But as he prepared to leave the courthouse, his thoughts kept returning to the man outside who embodied a different kind of American story, one often overlooked in the halls of power. Patel's security detail had already cleared their route to the waiting SUV. Standard protocol called for a quick exit with minimal public interaction. The threat assessment was always the same in downtown D.C. Too many variables, too many potential risks. But as they approached the courthouse steps, Patel made a decision that would surprise everyone, including his own protective team. He stopped walking and turned toward Bobby. The morning air was crisp, typical for October in Washington. Bobby had been sitting on those cold stone steps for hours, his thin jacket providing little warmth against the autumn chill. He'd already had his morning coffee, black, from the corner store where the owner sometimes let him pay with the quarters he'd collected. It wasn't much, but it was routine, and routine was what kept him grounded when everything else felt uncertain. As FBI Director Patel approached, Bobby didn't recognize him at first. He saw another man in an expensive suit, flanked by serious-looking people with earpieces. But there was something different about this one's eyes. They weren't looking through him or past him. They were looking at him, really seeing him. Bobby straightened up slightly, preparing for whatever interaction was about to unfold, not knowing it would become a moment that defined both their lives. "Good morning," Patel said simply, stopping directly in front of Bobby. His security detail exchanged glances but maintained their positions. Bobby looked up, surprised by the direct acknowledgement. Most people who spoke to him did so while walking past, offering hurried words without real engagement. But this man had stopped, made eye contact, and spoken like Bobby was worth his time. "Morning, sir," Bobby replied, his voice carrying the careful politeness of someone who'd learned not to make assumptions about strangers. He gestured slightly toward his cardboard sign. "I hate to ask, but if you could spare anything, even just $1, it would help me get something to eat today." His words were measured, respectful, the request of someone who understood the difference between asking and demanding. Patel's protective detail tensed almost imperceptibly. This wasn't in the security plan. Unscheduled interactions with unknown individuals always triggered concerns, but Patel remained calm, his attention focused entirely on Bobby. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine interest rather than the practiced politeness of a politician. The question caught Bobby off guard. It had been weeks since anyone had asked his name. "Robert Washington, sir. Most folks call me Bobby." He paused, studying Patel's face. "You look familiar, like maybe I've seen you on the news or something." A slight smile crossed Patel's face. "I'm Kash Patel. I work for the FBI." Bobby's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't retreat or change his posture. If anything, he seemed to sit up straighter, recognizing that he was speaking with someone who carried significant responsibility. "FBI Director," one of the security agents clarified quietly, though his tone suggested this introduction wasn't part of the planned schedule. Bobby nodded slowly, processing this information. "Well, Director Patel, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I know you must be busy with important things." There was no sarcasm in his voice, just genuine appreciation for being treated like a human being worthy of conversation. Patel crouched down slightly, bringing himself closer to Bobby's eye level. The gesture was subtle, but significant. It eliminated the physical hierarchy between them, turning their interaction into a conversation between equals, rather than a moment of charity from above. "Bobby, how long have you been out here?" he asked. The question was asked with the careful attention of someone accustomed to gathering information, but without the interrogational tone of law enforcement. "About 4 years now," Bobby answered honestly. "Lost my apartment when I couldn't work anymore. Bad back, you know. 30 years in construction takes its toll." He shifted slightly on the hard stone steps. "Had to choose between medication and rent one too many times. Eventually, the math just doesn't work out in your favor." His explanation was matter-of-fact, without self-pity or elaborate justification. Patel listened intently, his years of investigative training helping him read between the lines of Bobby's story. This wasn't someone who'd made reckless choices or burned bridges through addiction or crime. This was someone caught in the gap between circumstances and resources. A gap that existed for millions of Americans, even those who'd worked hard and played by the rules their entire lives. "You served?" Patel asked, noticing the small military pin on Bobby's worn jacket. Bobby's face brightened slightly. "Vietnam, 2 tours. 1st Infantry Division, got my discharge in '74, came home and learned a trade." There was pride in his voice when he talked about his service, the kind of pride that decades of hardship couldn't diminish. It was clear that his military experience remained a cornerstone of his identity. Patel nodded with respect. As someone who'd spent his career in public service, he understood the sacrifice that military service represented. "Thank you for your service, Bobby. That means something." The words weren't perfunctory. They carried the weight of someone who understood institutional duty. Bobby's eyes misted slightly at the acknowledgement, though he quickly composed himself with the discipline of a former soldier. The courthouse steps had become an unlikely stage for this interaction. Other people passing by began to slow down, some recognizing Patel from news coverage, others simply drawn by the unusual sight of a high-ranking official having an extended conversation with a homeless veteran. Smartphones appeared, though most people maintained a respectful distance, sensing that they were witnessing something more significant than a photo opportunity. Bobby, when you ask for $1, what does that dollar represent to you? Patel's question was unexpected, philosophical in a way that surprised both Bobby and the growing circle of observers. It wasn't the kind of question politicians typically asked homeless individuals. It was the question of someone who understood that every request represented a larger story, a deeper need, a human dignity that couldn't be reduced to simple transactions. Bobby considered the question carefully before answering. It represents hope, I guess. Not just for food, though that's important. It represents the possibility that someone still sees me as worth helping, that I haven't become invisible. His voice carried the wisdom of someone who'd been forced to examine life's fundamental questions, not in a classroom or boardroom, but on the streets where survival required brutal honesty. The answer clearly moved Patel. He stood slowly, his mind working through something more complex than a simple charitable response. Bobby, I want to give you something, but not just $1. He reached into his jacket pocket, but instead of pulling out his wallet, he retrieved a business card. The gesture puzzled Bobby, who was expecting either money or polite rejection, not whatever this represented. This is my direct number, Patel explained, holding out the card. Not my office number, not my assistant's number. Mine. Bobby stared at the card as if it might be some kind of elaborate joke. FBI directors didn't give their personal phone numbers to homeless veterans on courthouse steps. This simply didn't happen in the world as Bobby understood it. Yet here was the card, extended toward him with complete sincerity. Why would you do that? Bobby asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question carried decades of disappointment, moments when promises had been broken and help had failed to materialize. He'd learned to be cautious about offers that seemed too good to be true, even when they came from people with impressive titles and business cards. Patel's response would define not just this moment, but his entire approach to leadership. Because the FBI's mission is to protect and serve all Americans, Bobby. Not just the ones in suits and ties. Not just the ones who can afford lawyers or have political connections. All Americans. His voice carried the conviction of someone who'd thought deeply about what public service actually meant in practice. You're telling me you want to help me personally? Bobby's incredulity was understandable. In his 4 years on the streets, he'd encountered social workers, volunteers, religious groups, and various government programs. Some had been helpful, others less so. But never had someone at this level of authority offered direct, personal involvement in his situation. It challenged everything he thought he knew about how power operated in Washington. I'm telling you that your life matters, Bobby. Your service matters. Your current situation doesn't define your worth as a human being or as an American. Patel's words weren't rehearsed talking points. They came from a place of genuine conviction. Tomorrow morning, I want you to call that number. We're going to figure out how to get you the help you need, the help you've earned. The crowd that had gathered was now openly listening, some recording on their phones, others simply standing in silent witness to this unexpected encounter. A few reporters who'd been following Patel from the courthouse had pushed through the group, their cameras capturing every word. But Patel seemed oblivious to the attention, his focus entirely on Bobby and the commitment he was making. Bobby held the business card with trembling hands. Director Patel, I don't know what to say. People don't usually. He paused, struggling to find words for something outside his experience. People don't usually care about folks like me. We're problems to be managed, not people to be helped. The sadness in his voice reflected years of being treated as an inconvenience rather than a citizen. That stops today, Patel said firmly. At least for you, Bobby, and if I have anything to say about it, for others like you. He glanced around at the gathered crowd, his eyes settling briefly on the cameras. This isn't about publicity or politics. This is about remembering that government exists to serve people, especially those who've served us. One of Patel's security agents stepped forward discreetly, tapping his watch. The director had another meeting scheduled, and the security team was clearly uncomfortable with the extended public exposure. But Patel held up a hand, indicating he needed another moment. In the hierarchy of federal law enforcement, schedules mattered, but this moment mattered more. "Bobby, I'm going to ask you to trust me," Patel continued. "I know trust doesn't come easy when you've been let down, but I give you my word, not as FBI director, but as one American to another. That phone call tomorrow will start something real, something that will change your situation." The promise was specific, measurable, and public. There would be no hiding from it if he failed to follow through. Bobby studied Patel's face, using the same instincts that had kept him alive in Vietnam and on the streets to assess whether this man could be trusted. What he saw there was something rare in Washington: sincerity without calculation, power without arrogance. "I'll call," he said simply. "Thank you, Director Patel. This means more than you know." As Patel began to turn away, Bobby called out one more time, "Sir, can I still ask for that $1?" A smile spread across Patel's face, and he reached into his wallet. But instead of pulling out a single bill, he handed Bobby a 20. "For lunch," he said. "But more importantly, for proof that some promises get kept immediately." The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause as Patel and his security detail continued toward their vehicle. But the director stopped once more, turning back to address not just Bobby, but everyone who had witnessed the exchange. "What you just saw isn't unusual for me," he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the courthouse steps. "This is what public service looks like when we remember who we serve." As the FBI director's SUV pulled away from the courthouse, Bobby sat alone on the steps, staring at the business card and the $20 bill. Around him, the crowd slowly dispersed, but several people approached to shake his hand or offer their own small contributions. The interaction with Patel had transformed him from invisible to visible, from ignored to acknowledged, from hopeless to hopeful. Word of the encounter spread quickly through social media and news networks. Video clips of Patel crouching down to speak with Bobby, of the business card exchange, of the promise made in front of witnesses, began circulating within hours. But this wasn't going viral for the usual reasons, scandal or controversy, but because people recognized something authentic in what they'd witnessed. That evening, Bobby sat in a small diner near the courthouse, using some of Patel's $20 to buy his first hot meal in a week. The waitress, who'd seen the news coverage, refused to let him pay. "It's on the house," she said. "Anyone who can get an FBI director to stop and listen deserves a free meal." Bobby ate slowly, savoring not just the food but the dignity of sitting at a table like any other customer. Meanwhile, in his FBI office, Patel was fielding calls from his staff, from other federal agencies, and from media outlets wanting to know more about his unscheduled stop at the courthouse. His chief of staff was particularly concerned about the security implications and the precedent this might set. "Director, we can't have you stopping to help every homeless person in Washington," she argued. "You're right," Patel responded calmly. "We can't help everyone individually, but we can help this one person, and we can use his story to highlight systemic issues that affect thousands like him." He was already thinking beyond Bobby's individual case, seeing connections to broader problems of veteran homelessness, inadequate mental health services, and the gaps in the social safety net. That night, Patel made several phone calls from his home office. The first was to Dr. Sarah Chen, director of the VA's Homeless Veteran Outreach Program in the D.C. area. "Sarah, I met someone today who needs our help," he began, explaining Bobby's situation. Dr. Chen had worked with Patel on previous cases and knew that when the FBI director called personally, resources would be found. The second call was to Marcus Thompson, a private contractor who worked with the FBI on community outreach programs. Marcus had grown up in D.C.'s rougher neighborhoods and had built a successful business while maintaining connections to social service organizations throughout the city. "Marcus, I need you to help me coordinate something," Patel explained, "and I need it to work perfectly." By midnight, Patel had assembled a small team of people who understood both the urgency of Bobby's immediate needs and the broader implications of this very public commitment. They had 24 hours to create a plan that would not only help Bobby, but demonstrate how government could work efficiently and compassionately when leadership was genuinely committed to serving citizens. The next morning, Bobby stood outside a phone booth near the courthouse, Patel's business card in his hand. He'd barely slept, partly from excitement, partly from fear that the previous day had been some kind of elaborate misunderstanding. At exactly 9 a.m., he dialed the number, his heart pounding as the phone rang. "Bobby?" Patel's voice came through clearly after just 2 rings. "I've been waiting for your call." The fact that the FBI director had answered his own phone, that he'd recognized Bobby's voice immediately, that he seemed genuinely pleased to hear from him. All of this reinforced that yesterday hadn't been a dream or a publicity stunt. "Good morning, Director Patel. I'm calling like you asked." Bobby's voice was formal, respectful, but tinged with uncertainty about what came next. "Good," Patel responded. "Bobby, I want you to walk to the corner of 4th and Constitution. There's a coffee shop there called Constitution Cafe. Dr. Sarah Chen from the VA will be waiting for you at a table by the window. She's wearing a blue blazer and has gray hair." "The VA?" Bobby asked, his voice reflecting years of complicated history with Veterans Affairs bureaucracy. "Bobby, I know the VA hasn't always worked for you in the past. Dr. Chen is different. She's someone I trust, and she's there specifically to help you navigate the system more effectively. Will you meet with her?" 20 minutes later, Bobby walked into Constitution Cafe, still carrying his cardboard sign and wearing the same clothes from the day before. Dr. Chen spotted him immediately and stood to wave him over. She'd been briefed not just on Bobby's situation, but on the very public nature of Patel's commitment to help him. Failure wasn't an option. "Mr. Washington," Dr. Chen said, extending her hand, "I'm Sarah Chen. Director Patel spoke very highly of you." Bobby shook her hand, noting that she hadn't flinched at his appearance or maintained the professional distance he'd come to expect from government employees. "Thank you for meeting me, Dr. Chen. I'm not sure what this is all about, but Director Patel said you could help." Over coffee and breakfast, Dr. Chen explained that the VA had several programs designed specifically for homeless veterans, but that the system was admittedly complex and sometimes difficult to navigate. "What Director Patel has done," she explained, "is to ensure that you get personalized guidance through every step of the process. No more getting lost in bureaucracy." Dr. Chen had brought a folder containing forms, contact information, and a detailed timeline of services Bobby could access immediately. "We can start with temporary housing today," she explained. "There's a studio apartment in a VA-supported building about 10 minutes from here. It's yours for as long as you need it while we work on permanent solutions." Bobby stared at the forms, unable to process what he was hearing. "An apartment? Today?" Dr. Chen nodded. Director Patel was very clear that this needed to happen quickly and properly. "We've also scheduled you for a complete medical evaluation, including specialists for your back problems. And there's a counselor who works specifically with veterans transitioning off the streets." As they walked to the apartment building, Dr. Chen explained that Bobby's case had become a priority not because of media attention, but because Patel had called in personal favors and committed FBI resources to ensure success. "He staked his reputation on helping you," she said. "But more than that, he genuinely believes this is what government should do." The studio apartment was small but clean, with a bed, a kitchenette, and a bathroom with a shower. Bobby stood in the doorway for several minutes, unable to enter. "It's okay," Dr. Chen said gently. "It's yours. No catch, no time limit while we're working on your case." Bobby finally stepped inside, immediately sitting on the bed and putting his head in his hands. "Mr. Washington, are you all right?" Dr. Chen asked. Bobby looked up, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, Dr. Chen. It's just been 4 years since I had a door I could close, a bed that was mine, a shower without having to ask permission. I don't know how to thank Director Patel for this." That afternoon, Patel received a text message from Dr. Chen. "Bobby is settled in his apartment. Medical appointment scheduled for tomorrow. He wanted me to tell you that he's going to make you proud." Patel read the message twice, then forwarded it to his wife with a note. "This is why we do this work." The story continued to generate national attention. but not in the way typical Washington stories do. Instead of political controversy or scandal, people were sharing the videos and discussing what leadership looked like when it was focused on service rather than power. Editorial boards across the country began writing about the encounter, using it as an example of government working as it should. 3 days after their first meeting, Patel made an unannounced visit to Bobby's apartment. He found the veteran sitting at a small table, reading a book borrowed from the building's library. Bobby had showered, shaved, and was wearing new clothes provided by the VA. The transformation was remarkable, but what struck Patel most was the change in Bobby's eyes. They held hope now. Director Patel. Bobby stood immediately, offering his chair. "Please, sit down. I can't believe you came by." Patel looked around the small apartment, noting how Bobby had already made it his own. Military medals displayed on a shelf, a small American flag by the window, everything organized with military precision. "Bobby, I wanted to check on you personally, but I also wanted to talk about something bigger." Patel sat across from Bobby at the small table. "Your story has touched a lot of people. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to help us reach other veterans who might be in similar situations." Bobby leaned forward, interested. "What do you mean?" Patel explained that the FBI was developing a new community outreach program specifically focused on homeless veterans. "We want to train our agents to recognize the signs, to know what resources are available, to understand that sometimes law enforcement's job is to connect people with help rather than simply move them along." "You want me to help train FBI agents?" Bobby asked, incredulous. "Bobby, you understand homelessness from the inside. You understand what works and what doesn't, what treats people with dignity and what doesn't. That knowledge is valuable." Patel paused. "Plus, you've already proven that you can communicate effectively with law enforcement. Our conversation on the courthouse steps was probably the most productive interaction I've had all week." Over the next hour, Patel outlined his vision for the program. FBI agents would receive training not just on legal aspects of homelessness, but on the human aspects. How to approach someone like Bobby with respect, how to recognize the difference between criminal activity and survival behavior, how to connect people with appropriate resources rather than simply arresting them. Bobby was quiet for several minutes after Patel finished explaining. "Director, I've been arrested more times than I can count for things like sleeping in the wrong place or asking for money in the wrong area. I never thought I'd be in a position to help train the people who were arresting me." "That's exactly why we need you," Patel responded. "You can help us understand how to do better, how to be more effective and more humane at the same time." He leaned back in his chair. "Bobby, I made you a promise on those courthouse steps, but I'm hoping you'll help me make a bigger promise to other people in your situation." The following week, Bobby Washington found himself in a conference room at FBI headquarters, sitting across from 20 special agents who'd volunteered for the pilot community outreach program. The irony wasn't lost on him. 6 months ago, he might have been arrested by some of these same agents for vagrancy. Now he was helping train them to respond differently. "The first thing you need to understand," Bobby began, his voice steady despite his nervousness, "is that most homeless people aren't criminals. We're just people who ran out of options." He looked around the room at faces that were attentive, respectful. "When you approach someone like I was, you're not dealing with a criminal. You're dealing with someone who's probably scared, probably ashamed, and definitely tired." Agent Maria Rodriguez raised her hand. "Mr. Washington, how do we tell the difference between someone who needs help and someone who might be dangerous?" Bobby considered the question carefully. "You use the same instincts you use for everyone else. But remember that being homeless doesn't make someone dangerous. Being hungry, cold, and desperate might make someone unpredictable, but that's different than dangerous." For 2 hours, Bobby answered questions, shared stories, and helped the agents understand the daily reality of life on the streets. He explained which approaches had made him feel human and which had made him feel like a problem to be solved. He talked about the difference between charity and dignity, between helping and enabling. Agent James Miller asked about resources. "Mr. Washington, when we encounter someone in your former situation, what's the most helpful thing we can do?" Bobby smiled slightly. Ask their name, treat them like a person first. Then, if you can, help them connect with someone like Dr. Chen who knows how to navigate the system. Most of us aren't looking for handouts, we're looking for a way back. As the training session was winding down, Patel entered the conference room. He'd been watching from the observation room, taking notes on how the agents responded to Bobby's presentation. What he saw gave him hope that this program could work on a larger scale. The agents weren't just being polite, they were genuinely engaged, asking thoughtful questions, challenging their own assumptions. Bobby, Patel said after the agents had left, that was exactly what we needed. You've helped these agents understand something that no textbook could teach them. Bobby shook his head. Director Patel, they helped me understand something too. That there are people in law enforcement who genuinely want to help. I wish I'd met agents like them 4 years ago. The breakthrough moment came when Agent Rodriguez approached Bobby after the session. Mr. Washington, I patrol the downtown area regularly. There's a veteran I see near the metro station who reminds me of your story. Would you be willing to come with me sometime to make an introduction? Bobby looked at Patel, who nodded encouragingly. I'd be honored to help, Bobby said. That weekend, Bobby and Agent Rodriguez walked together through downtown D.C., stopping to talk with homeless individuals that Rodriguez encountered on her regular patrol. Bobby served as a translator of sorts, helping bridge the gap between law enforcement authority and street survival instincts. 3 veterans agreed to meet with Dr. Chen. 2 others accepted information about available resources. The pilot program's success exceeded everyone's expectations. Within a month, FBI agents trained in Bobby's approach had connected 47 homeless veterans with appropriate services. More importantly, they'd begun changing the dynamic between law enforcement and the homeless community, from adversarial to collaborative. Other federal agencies began requesting similar training programs. 6 weeks after their first meeting on the courthouse steps, Patel received a call that would test everything they'd built together. Bobby had been arrested by D.C. police for allegedly assaulting another homeless man near Union Station. The charges were serious, and if convicted, Bobby could face significant jail time. Everything they'd accomplished was suddenly at risk. Patel arrived at the D.C. jail within 2 hours of Bobby's arrest. He found the veteran sitting in a holding cell, his face bruised, his new clothes torn. Bobby, what happened? Patel asked through the bars. Bobby looked up, his eyes clear despite his injuries. Director, I didn't start this. There was a younger guy, maybe 25, getting beaten up by 3 men for his disability check. I couldn't just watch. The story that emerged from witness statements and security footage told a different tale than the initial police report. Bobby had indeed been involved in a physical altercation, but he'd intervened to protect a vulnerable person from being robbed. In doing so, he'd been injured himself before police arrived and made arrests based on the chaotic scene they encountered. Patel spent the next 48 hours working with D.C. prosecutors, FBI investigators, and Bobby's court-appointed attorney to ensure that all evidence was properly reviewed. Security footage from a nearby building clearly showed Bobby acting as a protector rather than an aggressor. The charges were dropped, but the incident had damaged Bobby's confidence in his new life. Director Patel, Bobby said when he was finally released, maybe this program isn't such a good idea. Maybe I'm not the right person to represent what you're trying to do. Patel looked at Bobby seriously. Bobby, what you did near Union Station is exactly why you're the right person. You saw someone vulnerable being victimized, and you acted to protect them, even though it put you at risk. That's not a liability. That's exactly the kind of character we want in this program. The incident became a teaching moment for the entire program. Patel used it during a presentation to other federal agency directors, explaining how Bobby's actions under pressure revealed the true nature of his character. This man could have walked away, Patel told his colleagues. He could have protected his new apartment, his new life, his new opportunities. Instead, he risked everything to protect someone more vulnerable than himself. That's the kind of person we want helping us serve the community. Word of Bobby's intervention spread through the homeless community faster than any government program could. homeless veterans began approaching FBI agents on the street, asking if they were part of Bobby's program. The veterans' reputation for integrity and courage had given the entire initiative credibility that no amount of official endorsement could have provided. 3 months after their first meeting, Patel promoted Bobby to a formal consultant position with the FBI's Community Outreach Division. It came with a salary, health benefits, and an office in the federal building where they'd first met. Bobby's first official act was to recommend expanding the program to include social workers, medical professionals, and job placement specialists. The program, now officially called the Washington Initiative, began receiving national attention from both law enforcement agencies and homeless advocacy groups. Bobby found himself testifying before congressional committees, speaking at police academies, and consulting with cities across the country that wanted to implement similar programs. During one congressional hearing, Representative Johnson asked Bobby what made the Washington Initiative different from other government programs for the homeless. Bobby thought for a moment before responding. "Congressman, most programs treat homelessness like a problem to be managed. This program treats homeless people like citizens to be served. That difference changes everything." As Bobby spoke to the congressional committee, Patel watched from the witness gallery, remembering the man he'd met on the courthouse steps just months earlier. The transformation wasn't just physical, though Bobby now wore a suit and carried himself with quiet confidence. The transformation was deeper. Bobby had rediscovered his sense of purpose, his belief that his life had value and meaning beyond mere survival. The moment that would define both men's legacies came during a national television interview on 60 Minutes. The correspondent asked Patel why he'd chosen to make such a public commitment to one homeless veteran when thousands of others remained on the streets. Patel's response would be quoted in leadership textbooks for years to come, because leadership isn't about helping everyone at once. It's about helping one person completely and then teaching others to do the same. Bobby, sitting beside Patel for the interview, was asked what he'd learned from their partnership. "I learned that government can work when the people in charge remember that they're public servants, not public figures," he said. "Director Patel didn't help me because it would look good on television. He helped me because it was the right thing to do, and then he made sure that help was real and lasting." The interviewer pressed further, asking whether one success story could really address systemic homelessness. Bobby leaned forward, his voice carrying the authority of lived experience. "Man, you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't whether one story solves everything. The question is whether we're willing to see homeless people as individuals worth saving, or just as statistics to manage. Director Patel saw me as worth saving." The 60-minute segment aired on a Sunday evening, reaching 20 million viewers. By Monday morning, Patel's office had received calls from mayors in 43 cities asking for guidance on implementing similar programs. Bobby's phone, his first cell phone in over 4 years, buzzed constantly with interview requests and speaking invitations. The story had touched something fundamental in American consciousness. More importantly, the segment had highlighted the broader implications of their partnership. FBI field offices across the country began reporting improved relationships with homeless communities. Veterans Affairs offices saw increased engagement from homeless veterans who'd previously avoided government services. Police departments reported decreased arrests for vagrancy as officers learned to connect people with services rather than simply moving them along. 6 months after their first meeting, Patel and Bobby stood together on the same courthouse steps where it had all begun. This time, they weren't alone. Dr. Chen was there, along with agents from the Washington Initiative, social workers, medical professionals, and representatives from veteran service organizations. They were unveiling a permanent information kiosk that would provide 24-hour access to housing, medical, and employment resources. "Bobby," Patel said as they prepared for the dedication ceremony, "do you remember what you asked me that first day?" Bobby smiled. "I asked for $1. Patel nodded. "And what did you get instead?" Bobby looked around at the crowd gathering for the ceremony, at the kiosk that would help countless others, at the program that was spreading across the nation. I got my life back. But more than that, I got to help other people get their lives back too. The dedication ceremony was attended by hundreds of people, including many homeless veterans who'd been helped by the Washington Initiative. Several spoke about their experiences, describing how the program had treated them with dignity while providing concrete assistance. The message was clear. This wasn't charity or political theater. This was government working as it was meant to work. As the ceremony concluded, a young homeless veteran approached Bobby hesitantly. "Mr. Washington, I heard about what you've been doing. I've been on the streets for 2 years, and I'm ready to accept help. Can you point me in the right direction?" Bobby smiled, remembering his own desperation just months earlier. "Son, that's exactly why we're here. Let me introduce you to Dr. Chen." Watching this interaction, Patel realized that their work had come full circle. Bobby had transformed from someone asking for help to someone providing it. The FBI had evolved from an agency that might have arrested Bobby for vagrancy to one that employed him as a consultant. Most importantly, they'd proven that individual compassion could catalyze systemic change. A year after their first meeting, the Washington Initiative had directly assisted over 800 homeless veterans and had been replicated in 15 cities. Bobby had been promoted to Regional Director of Community Outreach, overseeing programs across the Mid-Atlantic region. His salary allowed him to rent a one-bedroom apartment just blocks from FBI headquarters, closing the geographic circle that had begun on the courthouse steps. The program's success attracted attention from international law enforcement agencies. Bobby found himself consulting with police departments in London, Toronto, and Sydney, sharing the American model of community-oriented policing. During one presentation in London, a British constable asked Bobby what advice he'd give to officers encountering homeless individuals. "Remember that we're all closer to the streets than we think," Bobby replied. "Treat us like you'd want to be treated if circumstances were different." Patel's leadership philosophy, exemplified by his response to Bobby's simple request, became a case study in public administration programs across the country. Graduate students analyzed the decision-making process that led him to give his personal phone number to a homeless veteran, and the systematic thinking that transformed that individual interaction into institutional change. During a speech at the FBI National Academy, Patel reflected on the lessons learned from the Washington Initiative. Law enforcement's highest calling isn't to arrest our way out of social problems. It's to protect and serve all citizens, especially the most vulnerable. Sometimes that means making an arrest. Sometimes it means making a connection to services. Wisdom lies in knowing the difference. The climactic moment of their partnership came when Bobby was invited to speak at Patel's alma mater, the University of Chicago Law School. Standing at the podium where future lawyers and public servants would learn their craft, Bobby delivered a message that would influence a generation of leaders. Government doesn't fail because of bad policies or insufficient funding. It fails when the people in charge forget that they're serving human beings, not statistics. Director Patel never forgot that. In the months following Bobby's speech at the law school, applications to FBI community outreach programs increased by 300%. More significantly, other federal agencies began implementing similar human-centered approaches to service delivery. The Department of Veterans Affairs redesigned its intake procedures based on Bobby's recommendations. The Department of Housing and Urban Development incorporated Washington Initiative principles into its point-in-time homeless counts. Bobby's transformation had ripple effects throughout his personal life as well. His daughter, who hadn't spoken to him in years, saw the 60 Minutes interview and reached out. Their first conversation in over 4 years lasted 3 hours. She visited him in Washington, meeting Patel and seeing firsthand how her father had rebuilt his life through service to others. The reunion with his daughter led to reconciliation with other family members who'd lost touch during Bobby's years on the streets. His grandson, now 12, began visiting regularly, fascinated by his grandfather's work with the FBI. "Grandpa Bobby works with the good guys now," the boy told his classmates, unaware of how accurately he'd summarized his grandfather's transformation. As news of Bobby's family reunification spread through the homeless veteran community, it provided hope to others who'd lost contact with loved ones. The Washington Initiative began incorporating family reunification services into its programs, recognizing that isolation often contributed to homelessness and that rebuilding relationships could support sustained recovery. 2 years after their first meeting, Patel was promoted to a senior position in the Department of Justice, with national oversight of community policing initiatives. His first act was to ensure that the Washington Initiative would be expanded nationwide, with Bobby serving as National Director of Veteran Outreach. The homeless veteran who'd asked for $1 had become a senior federal employee responsible for helping thousands of others. The program's success caught the attention of the White House, leading to a Rose Garden ceremony where the president recognized both Patel and Bobby for their innovative approach to public service. Standing on the South Lawn, Bobby reflected on the journey from courthouse steps to the nation's most prestigious address. "Mr. President," he said during his remarks, "this honor belongs to every homeless veteran who's still fighting to get back on their feet." During the Rose Garden ceremony, the president announced that the Washington Initiative model would be incorporated into federal law enforcement training nationwide. The announcement meant that Bobby's story and insights would become part of standard curriculum for FBI agents, DEA agents, U.S. Marshals, and other federal law enforcement officers. One man's request for $1 had fundamentally changed how America's law enforcement agencies approached community service. Following the White House ceremony, Bobby was approached by publishers interested in his story. The resulting book, From the Steps to Service, became a bestseller and was adopted as required reading in criminal justice programs across the country. All proceeds from the book went to establishing the Washington Initiative Foundation, which provided microgrants to homeless veterans starting new lives. 3 years after that pivotal morning on the courthouse steps, Kash Patel and Bobby Washington have fundamentally changed how America thinks about homelessness, public service, and human dignity. Their partnership proved that transformational leadership begins with seeing individuals rather than problems, with responding to immediate need while building systematic solutions. The FBI director who stopped to listen and the veteran who asked for help had created something larger than either imagined possible. The Washington Initiative now operates in 47 states, has assisted over 15,000 homeless veterans, and has become the gold standard for community-oriented law enforcement. Bobby Washington oversees a team of 200 former homeless veterans who work as community liaisons, proving that lived experience combined with institutional support can create unprecedented success in addressing complex social challenges. More profoundly, their story has redefined public expectations of government service. Citizens no longer accept bureaucratic indifference as inevitable. They point to the Patel-Washington partnership as proof that individual compassion and systematic thinking can coexist, that public servants can be both efficient and humane, that government can treat its most vulnerable citizens with dignity while achieving measurable results. Bobby Washington now lives in a 2-bedroom apartment in Arlington, Virginia, with a view of the Potomac River and the federal buildings where he works each day. His walls display his military service medals alongside photographs with FBI agents, congressional leaders, and homeless veterans whose lives have been transformed through the Washington Initiative. He keeps Patel's original business card framed on his desk as a reminder of how dramatically life can change when someone chooses to see possibility rather than problems. Kash Patel continues to serve in federal law enforcement, but his legacy is forever linked to a moment of moral courage on courthouse steps. He has proven that true leadership isn't about commanding from a distance. It's about engaging directly with the people you serve, making specific commitments, and following through, regardless of political cost. His decision to give his personal phone number to a homeless veteran has become legendary in government service circles. Their partnership offers a powerful lesson about the nature of public service and human dignity. When Bobby Washington asked for $1, he was really asking to be seen as a human being worthy of respect and assistance. When Kash Patel responded with his business card and a promise, he was demonstrating that government exists to serve people, especially those who have served their country with honor and sacrifice. If this story moved you, remember that there are veterans like Bobby Washington in every American city, waiting not for charity, but for opportunity. Not for pity, but for respect. Share this video if you believe that leadership means serving others with dignity and courage. Subscribe if you want to see more stories about public servants who remember that government's highest calling is protecting and empowering every citizen. Because sometimes the most important question isn't whether you can spare $1, it's whether you can spare the time to see the person asking as worthy of your full attention and genuine help.